Good evening. It is good to see everybody here. I see we've already got several people tuning in. All right, so I have something I want to share with you. It has been right at 1 year that we started having streaming services. And I guess the previous week would make a year. Les did the first broadcast, but my involvement started a year ago after my son was a couple of weeks old. So I wanted to show you this clip I just dug up from my very first broadcast. And this is me making announcements. So have a look at this and then I'll show you something else. Hey, good morning, King's Crossing. We're happy to see you all here today. Proud to introduce you to our new son, Joaquin. Joaquin is just barely over 2 weeks old now, and we think he's really great because he's so little with all the coronavirus stuff. We got to kind of keep him quarantined at the house, but thought it might be fun to give him the chance to say hello to everyone. We're excited you're tuning in for worship today, and to get us started, we're going to go ahead and jump right into everyone's favorite part of worship, the announcements. All right. So here's a contrast from what we were looking at. And he's got a little green, so he's blending into my green screen some. But this little guy is a year old plus a couple of weeks. Did you see that baby? Baby? Who's that? You see that person on the screen? Wow. So hard to believe we've been at this for a year now, but despite all the frustrations of quarantine, there have been some good things in our life as well. And so we're grateful for this guy. And again, it's hard to believe that we're here over, a year later and still doing this. So enjoying how the Wednesday nights have gone. This has ended up being a really good thing. But yeah, I wanted to show him off a little bit since it's amazing that we've got that perspective now. So here we go. He's heading to bed. All right. Yes, that's quite a contrast, I think. So thanks for indulging me on that. All right, so we're going to get started here. We've just got one lesson left after this week in this link relationship series. We've gotten a lot of positive feedback on it. Glad we've been able to do it. And I think we've been able to touch on a pretty good variety of subjects, and I hope it's been helpful to everyone. So what I want to do is for tonight, we're going to be talking about finances. I know that for couples experiencing marital strife, something like 90% list finances as a source of significant stress. It's not the case necessarily that having a bigger income makes that problem go away. In fact, it has a lot more to do with how you use what it is that you have. There are couples that really do well and thrive on smaller incomes when they manage well and work together and coordinate and talk about it. But others can have vast incomes and not have any greater happiness with that just because of all the things that surround it and the ways we're tempted to use our material possessions as a form of status or whatever we might do with that. There's a lot of ways we can get off course. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to look first with you at a few Bible verses. I'll say as I get started, we are here Wednesday nights at 7 o'clock. I'll be talking closer to the end of tonight's class about the plan after this. I've got a topic picked out I'm excited about. And then I would just mention, if you enjoy this content, if you want to be part of the future class options that we're doing, please do like our fan page, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We would appreciate it. And as always, we're glad to hear your comments and receive your emails along the way. So let's start with a few scriptures that pertain to finances and money. And I would say, as we're getting started, if you'd like to share any advice at all from your own experiences, like I know that a lot of you I'm talking tonight are further along in years, have probably figured a lot of this stuff out. And so if you have words of wisdom or things that brought greater peace in your marriage, especially pertaining to how you've managed your finances, I would like to have you share those things. So feel free to weigh in. And as always, I think the class is better when we have a lot of comments. I like hearing from you, and I think it's a blessing to all of us to be able to share as we go about this. Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It says something about our attachment to material things based on how much it's going to bother us to lose some of them. I was having a conversation with Justin a few days ago, and he mentioned something in passing that I really liked. We were somehow bringing up the story of the rich young ruler, and you may remember he goes to Jesus and says, what do I need to do? I've kept all the commandments since I was a boy. Like, I've done all that. And Jesus says, go and sell everything that you have and give it to the poor, and then come follow me. And something I had never paused to ponder before was, what was the tone Jesus used as he made those comments? Because usually we kind of over dramatize everything that's a Jesus story. So the man says, Master, what must I do? And Jesus says, go and sell all that you have. And the way Justin retold the story was, oh, you already follow all that. Well, yeah, go ahead and just sell all the stuff you've got and then come follow me. Kind of like, what if he was a little snappy with it? I kind of like that thought, that Jesus could see right through it. Yeah, you got all this stuff. Go get rid of the stuff, then we'll talk about what's important to you. I don't know. I think it's an interesting reading scenario. But Jesus did say, where your treasure is where your heart will be. Treasure does pertain to how we think about finances. I think it pertains to some other aspects of our life as well. I've come to understand about myself. I am a person who sometimes struggles to have a lot of social and emotional energy. And so I have to kind of budget how I use it, and have to plan out my schedule well and my days well, so I have adequate time to kind of recharge and rejuvenate and then engage again. But like, for instance, for entertainment, if it's a sad, true story, I don't have any interest in watching it. That's not for me entertainment. I use entertainment as a form of escapism. I spend a lot of my time kind of helping people work through harsh realities. And so, for me, my emotional energy is something that I do treasure. And so I want to be thoughtful about what I do with it. But just the same, if you want to know what really matters to a person, isn't it amazing how we will find whatever excuse we need to avoid the things we don't want to do, but whatever the things are we do want to do, somehow we just manage to fit them in, right? Jesus says, wherever your treasure is, whatever it is that's precious to you, you'll make it important. Your time will be there. Your energy will be there. It'll be pretty conspicuous what you actually care about. Ecclesiastes 5:10. I think this is really true. Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless. Now, that's a part of a long line of things he's talking about as things that are not going to stand the test of eternity. In the presence of God, a lot of stuff's going to go away. And he says the accumulation of wealth. I mean, who has enough money, right? Like, no matter how much you've got, you would think you could probably use a little more, right? None of us would ever mind being able to do a little more, to own a little more. And I think this is a correct point. If what you really love is money, I don't know about you, but like, getting my first paycheck as an adult, the first like real grown-up full-time job that I had, was definitely the biggest paycheck I had ever gotten in my life. I remember the first one I got seemed so huge. And isn't it amazing how it's not any time at all until I look back on that and go, man, how did I even survive? So it's kind of like, however much you've got, it seems like there's a lot more out there. And that's a thing to be really careful about, because if that's what you're chasing, you're never going to reach the end of what seems like something else you need. Yes, pay yourself first. It's a good advice, Brenda, about savings. We usually spend as much as we make. And boy, isn't that the truth. It is so easy whenever there's a little extra money there to go do one more thing. Whatever your, I don't want to use the term vices, but like whatever it is you like to do to blow money. There's always another one out there, right? There's always someone marketing, vying to get your extra expenditures. But yeah, we have to think first about what it is we're going to do. We need to do the important things first. We need to work for the future first, and then whatever's left, we can do some other stuff with. That's good advice. Thank you, Brenda. Glad to hear from the rest of you as we go. I'm going to keep moving here. Romans 13:8. let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another, for whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. So Paul here is saying that the one thing you should always be seeking more of is the love of God. Because no matter how much of the love of God you give away, you only end up with more of it. Love only ever increases when you use it and you spend it. So he says that thing is worthwhile, but other kinds of debt are undesirable. You don't want to get wrapped up in a lot of debt, and we'll talk some more about some other verses that make some similar points. But yeah, that's I think an important principle to think about. Proverbs 13:11, dishonest money dwindles away, but whoever gathers money little by little makes it grow. Now, that's kind of related to your point, Brenda, that if we're intentional and disciplined about what we accumulate and how we accumulate it, we're more likely to hang on to it. But easy come, easy go. When it comes to, I can't quote a specific study. My understanding is that a lot of people who, for example, might win a large amount of money in the lottery often end up even worse off than before they won the lottery because, they didn't have the discipline in life to amass that amount of money. Not that all of them are undisciplined, but it's this really unexpected amount that comes their way. They haven't worked through the process of learning how to manage that much, and so they manage it really poorly. And again, the end result may be worse than how they started off. I mean, not to even mention what it would do to all your relationships. I mean, suddenly the word gets out that I've got millions and millions of dollars. I would imagine there'd be some strange people coming out of the woodwork suddenly wanting to be your long lost friend. It'd be hard to see anyone through the lens of normalcy once that starts to affect it. But dishonest money that you got quick and easy, money that you got in an underhanded fashion, it seems like that stuff just goes awful quick. But doing it a little at a time, paying yourself first, following the advice that Brenda shared, that's good advice. Hebrews. Isn't it amazing how many verses in the Bible talk about money? There really are a lot of them, and I'm not even coming close to covering all of them. It says, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. What he is addressing here, in my opinion, is that there is some tendency to use money as a way to try and establish and protect ourselves. And there's some real ways in which it's valuable to have some savings and things to be prepared for tragedies that life will throw your way. But if everything just centers around the accumulation of money and material things, he says you're going to end up in a bad spot. He says if you've already got the love of God and the presence of God who will never leave you and never forsake you, that should be the thing that comes first. And contentment, in contrast to some of the verses we were looking at, where like the person who just loves money never has enough of it, we have to get to a point that we do kind of love what we have and value what we have and don't make everything just about accumulating another one. Important principle to think about. Here's one that you're probably all familiar with from Jesus in Matthew chapter 6. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. So Jesus definitely talks about our finances and says, you're going to serve one thing or the other. And you've only got one throne in your life. There is only one person, being, entity who is able to sit on the throne of your life. You have, I like to say, the term religion comes from like a term for ruler, like a measuring ruler. And I like to say that it doesn't matter if you're religious or atheist or whatever you are. Everyone has a religion because everyone has something around which they orient their life. And some of y'all have heard me talk about this before, but I think it's absolutely true that all of us have something that is sitting on the throne that, the buck stops with this. Everything else somehow has to reorient around the demands that this thing places on my life. And Jesus is saying either God is going to sit on that throne or something else will. And if that something else is money, you're ultimately going to end up serving what it takes to get more money than you will what it takes to further God's purposes in your life. And so Jesus doesn't doesn't mince any words about the dangers of money and the distractions that it creates for us. Thank you, Easter Bell. This is correct. Yeah, having too much money distracts us. We become more focused on our treasure than the Lord and on how to be of service to Him. Sometimes I think it's worth pulling back and, especially when we're in a position to accumulate more possessions, you get enough stuff and it becomes like a full-time job just maintaining your stuff. And so maybe in your mind you're saying, if I just had a little more money or some nicer things or a couple of more properties or whatever it is, like I would want to spend all my energy at that point. Since I've got all my relaxation, I'll spend all my energy serving God. But as it turns out, you're going to spend so much time getting things repaired, making upgrades, replacing this, replacing that. It's a lot of work owning a lot of possessions. I mean, just even cleaning a bigger house than a smaller house can become a pretty major ordeal. So yeah, you're right. We want to say that having all the extra financial fortitude is a blessing from God, and I think that it is. Very often, however, you're right. There are some unique temptations that affluence creates for us that we can really get distracted by the money or by what the money makes possible for us. 1 Timothy 6 and verse 10, I bet you know this one. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. He doesn't say that money is the root of all evil. He says it is the love of money. When we do that thing that Ecclesiastes was talking about, where we just obsess over it and are always hungry for more. If what I really love most is money, if that's the thing that's driving me, a lot of evil comes from that. Some people, he says, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Who do you end up hurting ultimately? It is yourself. You end up experiencing pain, whether it was because you neglected your family in order to further your career, or you were doing something dishonest and under the table. Like ultimately, you're going to end up feeling the pain of like the sudden realization that I used so much of my life for what was not that important and what doesn't ultimately bring me happiness. So again, good advice. The love of money is a starting point for a lot of bad stuff, he says. And I think that's also good advice. And here we go. If you've ever read a Dave Ramsey book, and we are going to talk some about some Dave Ramsey stuff tonight, you can't talk about money and Dave Ramsey without talking about this stuff. The rich rule over the poor. It often is the case that those with financial means have an advantage in society. They may have connections or whatever it is, but the rich tend to have the upper hand over those who don't have the possessions or the connections. And he says the borrower is a slave to the lender. What is the fundamental problem with buying a lot of what you have on borrowed money? It means that when you get your paycheck, someone else gets a big cut of it before you get yours. So whatever you make, this belongs to them before it belongs to me. And so taking on heavy loads of debt, no matter how much you want that nice thing, whatever it is, vehicle, possession, entertainment center, like all the stuff we like to buy, fancy vacations, stuff's great if you can afford it. And there's ways to save up and afford a lot of nice things. But if what we're doing is all on money that we borrowed, it means whoever owned that money that we borrowed is going to end up to some degree kind of owning us. So debt really does enslave us. Because if you're in a position where you've absolutely got to make massive amounts of payments on borrowed money, it can be a rough spot. In our country, I know everyone has disagreements on issues of things like student loan debt, but I'll tell you, the price of higher education. I know my parents' generation, I always hear the stories about how, I went to college and I worked my way through and paid my way as I went. Like, well, that's really nice when you could afford to do that on a part-time job income and also probably afford a vehicle. But these days, you're talking tens of thousands of dollars. I've got several friends who got out of college and as a married couple start off like the equivalent of an entire house in debt for their education. And man, that's a rough spot to be in. Did they do it themselves? Yes. At the same time, what are your options for careers if you don't have a degree? That's one of the things I know as a nation we're all kind of looking at and rethinking. But Yeah, the cost of higher education has gotten to be a pretty grave concern for a lot of people, and what that's doing to those who sign up for these heavy debt loads. So yeah, you do become slave to the one who lends you the money. All right, I want to talk about a few different dynamics that make a difference in a marriage relationship. So it's worth talking about as a couple. Each of you probably has a money style. And if you are sitting there with your significant other, I think it's worth you two interacting at this point a bit. Usually, you can be one of two things. Usually, you are either a saver or a spender. Sometimes you have a marriage of two of the same thing. So maybe you got two savers or two spenders. A lot of times, what I see is that one person has one tendency, the other person has the other. Now, wouldn't it be easy to say that only those who save are doing something virtuous? But I don't think that's the case. Like, I think there is value in, my tendency is to be kind of I'll say fiscal conservative, but that's a nice way to say tightwad, right? It's good to hold back. It's good to prepare for the rainy days. It is good to be really measured and thoughtful about how we use our resources. But, there are some occasions in life where it's completely appropriate to do something beautiful, to do something nice and memorable. We're going to be at this place one time with our family, and it's worth, sure, the photo opportunity might be overpriced, but it's also the only time we'll get it. I think there's a good case to be made for. Sometimes it's not just good to save, it's also good to do something with the resources. You hear these stories about, an elderly person who dies and they go check their house and they've got like $2 million in the walls and under their mattresses, like they just never spend anything at all. And at some point it's, what was the point of having it if you don't have anything to show for it, really? What did it do to, the goal is not to accumulate money. The goal is to use money in a way that honors God, but also strengthens your family, gives you good memories. Yeah, this is good, Kathy. I think we swap roles. It depends on what the spending is for. I think that's true for me too, Kathy, because I tend to lean toward the saver side. Not that Carolina's an out of control spender, because she's not, but I'm usually the one that wants to pull back, unless it's a thing I've just really thought through and want and have been working on for a while. So I would say she probably tends to go for more little purchases along the way. I tend to hold back, and then when I'm in, I'm kind of all in, right? So yeah, we have different styles, and you're right. It might depend on the situation for our role, but worth paying attention to which one of you is more naturally which of those things, and that's one dynamic that will affect you, because you need to have some space to talk about the value of what you're doing and to include each other and talk about what your decisions are going to be. Another issue is budget skills. There are at least three categories of people as it pertains to budgeting. You have one category, and if you want, you can identify yourself on here. Some people would say, I live religiously by a budget. So I budget everything. I name every dollar, where it's going. I have a rigid plan for what's supposed to happen. You have other people who say, well, I kind of budget and I kind of follow it, but then I also fudge on some things here and there, and maybe not super rigid. And then you have category 3, which, you say, do you have a budget? And they say, well, what's that? Right? Like, you have kind of different categories of people. I would say in a marriage, it would be fairly dangerous to have both of you be in category 3. But it is generally the case that one of you will have slightly stronger financial skills than the other. I mean, I know I could be talking to a couple right now where both of you are accountants or something, right? So that's not always the case, but often, at least as it pertains to family finances, one of you kind of gravitates toward that role. It can be either person. I would say that it's important to do things collaboratively. So whichever one of you tends to be the budgeter, you should absolutely give it your best, but once you've given it your best, your spouse needs to have a lot of input on the plan. So you can make a good plan, but the plan needs to be open to input, because what you see as the best uses of what comes in, they might have some other things that they see as important, or maybe some of the ones you see as really important, they see as moderately important. And most of the time, just by talking it out, you can find healthy points of compromise. But budgeting, people kind of have different approaches to that. So figure out which of you leans towards that and try to agree on what each of you will do accordingly. So another thing that affects a lot of people and their relationship to finances would be some of their financial fears. So here are 4 common ones. As it pertains to money, I wonder if you resonate with any of these. For some people, what makes them anxious about money is what they would call kind of a lack of influence. This is especially true if you've got one spouse that's really controlling of the finances and the other spouse is like, I don't really get to say what we're going to do. Anytime I try and spend something, you're really critical of me, but then you kind of make decisions and do what you see fit, but like I'm not allowed to have an opinion on how I disagree with that. So feeling like you don't get input over the family finances can be a pretty stressful thing. And so that would be one area to be cautious about. Do you sense within yourself that tendency to feel like, my biggest fear about money is not that we won't have it, but that I don't get any say over what we do with it. If that is you or your spouse's tendency, good to know that that's the case and to talk about that and to strategize. Like, how can I make sure that you don't feel like you're not going to have influence? How can I be sure that you have kind of a opportunity to veto or add to whatever it is we're trying to budget? So that's important. Second of these would be a lack of security, where what makes you fearful and stressed about money is just the fear that you don't have enough to withstand some negative thing. And again, there are some limits to how much this is reasonable, because you can have all the money in the world and there can still be some circumstances that financially you just can't quite dig your way out of. You just never know what's going to come your way. Tragedies hit. It's good to be prepared, but it can also become a problem if you really won't even live life because you are so driven by this fear of not being secure. So in that case, it's worth, again, talking together, trying to figure out what is a reasonable expectation for emergency fund, savings for this or for that. What is a reasonable expectation for what we can do to kind of buckle down on budgeting and savings. And let's, agree on a plan and follow the plan, but you can't let a fear of not being secure be the only thing that drives you. Lack of respect would be another one. Kind of ties into lack of influence, where no matter what I do, I feel criticized for it, and I don't feel like I'm being treated as an equal partner, as an adult. You don't want that to be the case. And then this fourth one is also significant. Feeling like this fear that I'm not going to be able to realize my dreams. As we've already talked about, you don't want to be just driven by raw materialism, where everything is just about accumulating more stuff or money or whatever it is. But there are some ways in which, as we think about money, there's a lot in your life that money unlocks. Why is money such a big temptation and such a big problem? Because it's pretty powerful in what it can do. So for some of us, it's like this fear of not being able to do things that are really important to us. And so what does money mean to you? It means having some freedom to do what matters. I've come to appreciate as well that as you're trying to prioritize things financially, you may be able to figure out like one of these types of items that's most important to you. So something I've, in kind of being introspective, something I've kind of realized about myself, like a thing that I absolutely love. I love traveling to new places, new experiences. Undoubtedly, for me, like short-term mission trips, they are really about the mission, but I love the adventure aspect of it as well. I love the challenge of a new culture and a new setting. I love trying new foods, meeting people with different backgrounds than me. There are a lot of other things that are less important to me. So I'm not one who generally tries to buy things because I feel like they're going to give me status. I'm pretty good about not just accumulating things because I need to be seen a certain way. Like I don't have that much of a struggle with that kind of thing. But I've learned for me that like it's pretty important to me to have some sort of plan in place to be sure, like whatever we're doing financially, I need to be able to go like I want us to be able to go some places sometimes to see things and to try things. And so, of all the different ways you could prioritize finances, some people try to do all the above, where we want fancy trips, an amazing house, brand new vehicles, whatever it is. You might discover that for you, like, maybe it is the thing where it really, really makes my day to have a nice vehicle that I like to drive, and this and that. Nothing intrinsically wrong with liking some nice things, but it might be worth kind of sorting through, like, if I could have one of these things and be pretty happy with it, maybe I can let go of some of those other things. Because if you try to spend everything on everything, you can undermine some of your security for the future and stretch yourself too thin. So as far as realizing your dreams, maybe try to sort through what specific dreams are you concerned about, because there's a lot of stuff that is within reason that you can accomplish and be able to do or to own. And if just a couple of simple things will do it for you, that's better than trying to bite off everything. Easter Bell, my understanding is that and I think I'm quoting Dave Ramsey, and this figure is a few years old, so I'm not sure about current statistics, but I think it is Dave Ramsey who I've heard say that for those people who do get divorced, 90% of them list finances as a significant source of stress. So usually as they're doing this, they don't get divorced for one reason, but if you want a reason that's always on the list, this is that reason. And so many things tie into how we manage our money. I think that's basically correct, Easter Bell. So these would be some areas of financial fears. And again, you and your spouse should talk and be well aware of, like, if there's anything about money that makes you anxious, what is it? Like, how do we make sure we have a plan to take care of what makes you fearful to a healthy and reasonable expectation, but also not to go overboard and out of control with whatever that fear is. So we don't want to be driven by fear, but we should pay attention to our fears, because they emotional reasoning. I struggle sometimes with a lot of different things where I can say, intellectually, I get it. I know where this is coming from. I understand what's happening. Emotionally, totally not okay with it. We have those times. And so important to sort those sorts of issues out. One thing I'm curious that I think is also an important conversation for a couple: how did your family handle money growing up? It makes a difference. Was mom the bigger budgeter? Was dad the bigger budgeter? Were they both really involved in this together? Is money seen as something to be used for just making memories? Is money seen as something to kind of be hoarded and held onto at all costs? However your family handled their finances and their views on money will definitely impact you. Without wanting to, overly reveal things about my own background. Like, I think about my parents, which of them did the budget, how they talked about money, how we felt about money. And I'll tell you, I am absolutely a reverberation of all of the best and worst tendencies that we probably had. And so I think it's the case that whatever you grew up with does really shape the way that you think about it and feel about it. So I am kind of curious if any of you want to share, like, what was it like for you growing up and how your family talked about money? Like, did they teach you how to manage it? Did they just kind of turn you loose and let you make your mistakes and figure it out on your own? Like, how does your family handle money? Yeah, Kathy, that's good. It made me frugal. We saw our mom struggle. I tell you, there's really something unique about that generation that grew up in the Great Depression. When it's really an issue of whether or not you're going to be able to find food or work or anything, boy, that just changes how you look at everything. They don't want to waste anything. That is in contrast to the way we are these days, where, like, everyone is living a reasonably good standard of life, and still will think we need more, don't value what we have, throw things away without thinking about it. It was she called herself a shoestring saver. Yeah. When I was living in Old Hickory, Tennessee, we moved there, and when we started, we rented a house diagonally across from the church parking lot in this community. And I had to get away from there because it's like anytime I would look out my window and see cars in the church parking lot, I would freak out and think, "Oh no, what was I supposed to be there for that I forgot?" So that was a negative thing. But these were houses built I think ours was built in like 1916, and like the size of their closets, a standard size coat hanger from today was too wide. Like we couldn't even put coat hangers in the old closets we had because they were bumping the wall on this side and sticking out on this side. And it was just a tiny space, and people didn't own that many changes of clothing. They just didn't. And so, like, I'll say this to my shame, I guess, but it was a 3-bedroom house and just the two of us. We ended up taking one of those bedrooms and just making it the closet because, our clothing wouldn't begin to fit in one of those. So yeah, I know that culture has changed just in looking at what kind of closets do we assume people need for their stuff. And there are walk-in closets today that are like the size of a living room from a few years ago. So yeah, that is something that has changed for sure. But you should, especially getting into relationships, you should think a lot about what was money like in your house and your spouse's family, and how does that shape your attitudes? Because it definitely did and will affect you. Terry, let's see. My parents never had discussions about finances in our present, so I never had a clue what financial state we were in. On the positive side, my parents were excellent teachers of budgeting and financial responsibility. So nice if you got to miss out on, maybe they never had any stressful times. I would assume they probably did. But yeah, Terry, it's nice. It's nice if they spared you that, and good that they taught you some positive things. Yeah, there you go. My mother went back to work so she could buy things for the house like carpeting or drapes, etc. My parents were not much on buying on extended credit. We didn't drive new cars, and there's certainly some wisdom to all of that, Cheryl. And yeah, sometimes you just have to do a little extra if you want to have a little extra, and no harm in that. New cars they often drop their value pretty quickly, don't they? So yeah, these are all things that are significant and do shape how you think about things. Another question you have to ask, especially if you're looking at getting married with someone, is what is their load of debt? It's an important question. So, if you went to college, got a degree, and let's say you had really good scholarships, or you went to a less expensive school, or maybe your parents were in a position to cover what your scholarships didn't, it's awesome to be able to get out without any debt. If you get married to someone who's got $60,000 in student loans, that money becomes your problem too. And not that there's a big part of me that would not want to say, don't just make that a deciding factor in whether you marry someone, but you'd be nuts not to really spend some time looking at that and talking about it and thinking through what this is going to mean for your family's finances, because marrying someone with a significant amount of financial debt, there will be stress about it. There absolutely will be, very likely, surrounding that kind of thing. So that's important. Wow, this is fascinating. My dad went broke when I was 5 in a business deal that didn't work out like he had planned, and it took him about the next 18 years to recover. Yeah, Gene, and for you being 5, you're a man yourself before he got to the other side of that. So we have to be careful with our financial dealings. But yeah, you can't always know how a deal is going to turn out. But thank you. Yeah, that's a helpful perspective. That not that we can't dig our way out, but it can take a lot of time. And again, if you're looking at marrying someone who's in the hole, really got to look before you leap and weigh out all that this means and all that it involves. Also gets into why influence is so important. We've talked about this several weeks, that whatever I'm going to do, if you're my other half, if it's you could even talk about what the threshold is. What am I allowed to do? How much am I allowed to spend without us really needing to talk about it? I don't think that amount needs to be a very big amount, because I think you get very far at all, and you both probably need to be on the same page on what you're doing. But it would be super frustrating if you're married to someone who makes some sort of wild financial decisions and you're not even in agreement. Like if it's a measured, calculated risk we're choosing to take together, that's one thing. But if it's a unilateral move, man, what a frustrating thing to be permanently linked into that. So, yeah, thank you for sharing all that. But that's a big question. What is the burden of debt that the other person is carrying? The less, the better. Another thing that I try to emphasize, especially in premarital counseling, I've been amazed how frequently I encounter this mindset of people like wanting to get married, but wanting to keep their finances super separate. Like, we're all in on this. We're going to get married. Both of us have full-time jobs and full-time incomes. But it's like they perpetually will be arguing about who's going to pay which bills and how this is all going to balance out. And I'm bringing in more than you're bringing in. And it's like, if you want to have any sort of peace in your life, there is not my money and your money. This is just our money. That's how it's got to be. You should. I strongly advocate for, if you're married, sharing your bank accounts and having access to everything, keeping each other included in all the decisions. But whatever we have, I might be out there earning an income, but you're doing other things, contributing to our household's well-being. So just because I'm the one who's got my name on the paycheck doesn't mean that you're not contributing or that I should treat it all as if it's just mine only. I would say that's one general piece of advice I give to a lot of couples and frankly see a lot struggle with. Important that we view the money intrinsically. Once we're married, this is not yours or mine. It is only ours. So Dave Ramsey is kind of a guru for finances. If you haven't heard of Dave Ramsey, he's based out of Nashville, Tennessee. So I grew up, my parents benefited greatly from listening to his radio show and then kind of following the steps as he lays them out. I would say that what I like best about Dave Ramsey is that I do think he is very effective at helping people at least start to get their financial house in order, start eliminating debts and getting themselves in a place that they are doing good things with their money. He's actually got, I believe it's either 7 or 8 baby steps. I don't even think it's necessary for us to delve into all of those, but I think these first 4 are pretty good. I think I should also say, I am not a financial advisor. And so we're talking about money, but at the same time, there are well-credentialed people. If you really are seeking financial advice, there are people other than me that you should talk to. So I'm kind of leaning on his recommendations here. And I do think these are some good principles. He says, if you haven't done anything else financially and you feel like your financial house is a mess, first thing you should do is to save up at least $1,000 to get an emergency fund started. And also at whatever point you have to use that emergency fund, and you will immediately pause everything else until you replenish it back to at least $1,000 so that you're able to weather whatever things come your way. And I think this is just wise because this keeps you from needing immediately to put a negative thing like on a credit card or something and getting charged exorbitant interest rates, which is a huge problem with credit card debt, right? Like they generally charge very high levels of interest, and you end up spending and paying so much more than what the thing was actually worth. So he says go ahead and if nothing else, at least get $1,000 set aside for some sort of emergency fund. This is good advice, I think. Second thing he recommends is to pay off all debt other than your house using what he calls the snowball method. His opinion is that you do best when you make this an emotional thing. And so he says, line your debts up from smallest to largest. He even, other advisors I know would say you should do it based on who's charging you the most interest. He says, do it based on whichever one you can pay off the fastest. And you pay the minimum on everything else and you really attack the small one. And then once you've attacked that small one and paid it off, you feel good about it and you apply everything you were spending on that and now attack the next one. And it's like you just keep rolling and rolling and rolling until you have gradually eliminated all those. And so he views home purchase as an asset. You don't want to bite off more than you can chew with a home purchase, but good for your peace, stability, marriage relationship. It's good not to carry a heavy load of debt if you can. Thank you, Kevin, for affirming me here. Yeah, contribution to the household must mean more than financial. That's right. It is not fair to say, I'm the one bringing home the bacon. What are you good for? Like, not useful to do that. Oh boy, that's the truth, Sherry. This past year should have taught us that we need an emergency fund. I know I needed mine a few times. Yeah, this last year has. We just have no idea what's going to happen, do we? So thank you, Sherry. You're exactly right. We have. I think it is Dave Ramsey who shared this that they say every family has some sort of a major financial catastrophe. I think it's about, I want to say it's like every 8 years, something like that. Um, and for that reason, yeah, you should try to have a pretty substantial. We'll get to this, I guess, with baby step number three. He says you should save up 3 to 6 months of expenses in an emergency fund. So, looking at your paychecks, what does it actually cost for you to live 3 or 6 months? If all of a sudden your income comes to a screeching halt, could you survive 3 to 6 months just on what you've got saved up? Because that probably gives you enough time either to look for another job or to work something else out. But 3 to 6 months of income is kind of his recommended amount. And so, getting back to your point, Sherry, having an emergency fund in place, the $1,000 is an important start, but not long after that, the next goal is just to make sure that if I had a pretty major catastrophe, I'd be able to weather it. So I know for Carolina and me, it was actually right as we got ready to move to King's Crossing. We had built up a pretty good emergency fund. We both had full-time jobs, and we were really, frankly, doing pretty well in that regard. And then all at once, and I won't even remember all the items, but our house suddenly had foundation damage. We had to have foundation repair work done. Tornado came close by. They're in Middle Tennessee. We had to put a new roof on our house. Our upstairs air conditioning unit went out. I believe our hot water heater went out. And then right as we were moving, our washing machine died. All of that within like a couple of months. And fortunately, we had some stuff in place to be able to tackle that. But I'll tell you, it takes a while to recover from that level of necessary expenditures. But just goes to show, like, it's not a matter of like just hoping nothing bad ever happens to you. I mean, it will. Like, you are going to have major things come up from time to time, just like to Sherry's point, this whole year, all of a sudden, where a lot of people, especially business owners, like if you're living kind of week to week or month to month in terms of business revenue, and all of a sudden the government won't let you run your business for however long, man, what have you got in place to make sure you can weather that storm? And that's really important. But yeah, I think we've said a lot about this, but yeah, an emergency fund will do a lot for you in the long term and very important. And then it is Dave Ramsey's recommendation that you invest 15% of your income in retirement. He's a big fan of mutual fund investing. Again, I am not going to attempt to give out financial advice or to pick stocks for you or to recommend funds. I will say I have come to appreciate the value of not just funds that perform well, but also paying attention to the fees that they charge. So, like, let's say you're getting into a mutual fund that gives you a good amount of interest on your investment, and let's say that it's growing at a good rate, but if the amount that they charge for you to invest with them is like 5%, and you could find an index fund that's more automated but basically follows the same path and grows at about the same rate, and their fee is like 0.5%. Man, that's like over time, compounding interest is really incredible. I guess I could have included, it's just fascinating to look at the way compounding interest works over time, that it really just accelerates with time. And it gets back to that thing that Brenda shared early on about if you pay yourself first, you always put some aside, you're always trying to keep the nest egg growing along little by little. It comes to really take on a lot of action on its own. And it's fun to see that start to make progress. I know when we were trying to get retirement savings going in our like early to mid 20s, I didn't have a big enough income to put much in there, and I'm happy to be in ministry, but it's not the case that I've worked at any churches that do like retirement matching or anything like that. It's just kind of like up to you to do it. And yeah, it's not fun when you can't put in very much at a time, but amazingly it does. It's like one day you kind of look around and all of a sudden, like, not quite where I would like to be, but hey, we've made progress. Like it's not nothing, and it does add up over time. But Dave Ramsey suggests you arrange your finances in such a way that even as you budget, he says a full 15% of your income should be going toward your retirement. Now he goes on from there to make further recommended steps, but I think especially if I'm talking to a younger couple, just those first 4 steps are quite a bit to take on, but also really foundational to everything else. And so if you can't do anything else, start with step 1, work your way into step 2. Step 3 is a good place to be. And yeah, I think, again, I am not a financial advisor, so I'm not, I want to be careful in what I say here, but I think that it's worth looking into this, especially in trying to get rid of debt. Debt is kind of the big thing you want to avoid. And you're right, Kathy. It feels very good to pay off the little things. Very good to see some milestones reached, and it does. It feels good, and that is part of his method with the snowball, like paying it off one thing at a time, starting with the little things, have a small victory and a bigger victory and a bigger victory, and major celebration when you get the last big thing paid off and debt free other than the house. Like that's a cool place to be. So I wanted to reference those baby steps. I also want to say, when it comes to your finances, I do recommend this. You should sit down on the front end, or like I try to do the budget like once a year to kind of hit refresh on everything. But you should really think a lot on the front end about what you're doing. You should talk it through, strategize, prioritize, kind of name what you're going to do with every bit of this. And whatever the most important things you're going to do are, once you've thought them through, you should implement them, and then you should never have to think about them at all. So how you're going to pay, mortgage or rent, any other debts that you need to pay, charitable contributions, whatever you have to spend to be insured, the investments that you're getting going, regular bills that you're going, like you just know, I'm always going to pay the internet bill. Whatever it is, are going to be ongoing expenses that are the most important things. Don't make it be the case that every month, oh man, I got to remember to send that in. Oh yeah, I have to remember on this date to do that. Like if it's super important, it is so easy these days to automate everything. So, you can use your banking online to set up automatic transfers to this account or that account, set up automatic payments on certain days of the month. And the really important stuff, think about it a lot and then make it where you don't have to think about it at all. So the most important stuff, you just rest at night knowing the important stuff got done. And then the other stuff is what you would fool with a little more. I'm going to talk about that some more in just a minute. I would say if I'm talking to anyone who's a bit younger, some other things you really ought to consider. One would be life insurance, and different people have different philosophies about what life insurance is supposed to be for. But I will say, the younger you are, the cheaper it is. And if you can get locked in at a very good rate for a large amount of insurance, if something, God forbid, if something were to happen to you, you could at least make sure that your spouse is in a position to where, I know some would use a rule of thumb like for 5 years. What would your income be over the next 5 years? Could you get a policy that would give them that equivalent amount so that they could readjust and figure out what they're going to do to move on? Because 5 years, you can probably sort through a lot of that. Some people just kind of bite off the biggest amount they can possibly get. But different types of life insurance. And again, Dave Ramsey has a lot of opinions on which kinds are better than others. I tend to agree with him. But especially if you're younger, think about this. If you're older and you've already done a lot of investing and you've got enough assets to where you could afford, like your family could just afford to pay for your funeral, it may not be so pressing to have life insurance. Same thing for younger people with disability insurance or long-term care insurance. And so something that I learned a few years ago is that you can get disability insurance policies that kind of have definitions specific to you. So I have disability insurance that is written in such a way that it is specific to the task of ministry. Because some companies would say, well, sure, you're not able to preach anymore, but you could be a greeter at Walmart. I've got the kind of policy that says if I cannot carry out the tasks of ministry that I'm doing, that is the definition by which I'm considered a disabled person. Like if something were to, God forbid, if something were to happen to me. So disability, or you end up kind of a vegetative state where for years you have to receive some sort of medical care. These are insurances that could be useful to anyone, but especially worth at least looking into if you're a younger person. And again, the younger you are, the cheaper stuff is. So even if it doesn't seem like you have a lot of extra, the sooner you can lock that stuff in, often the better you are. There you go, Kevin. All investments in Whataburger. I said no such thing, even though I enjoy Whataburger for sure. All right. So I think I've said this several times, but all budgeting should be collaborative. You should do it together and include each other in how you do it. I've gotten to the point where when I talk to couples in counseling, a lot of times finances are something we end up talking about. And this is something a financial advisor kind of taught me to do. So I'm going to share with you kind of my method for how I go about managing our monthly income. And so I do this through having, this may seem complicated, but I've kind of got 3 different checking accounts that I work with. And so I mentioned that you want to think through the really, really important stuff and automate all of it. So I've got one main checking account. I found one that pays a decent amount of interest. And again, I want to be cautious about giving out financial advice. So if you want to know about it, ask me and I can tell you where I've got it. But I've got an online-based checking account, and I deposit all my paychecks there, and I use it for everything that's automated. So mortgage payments, insurance payments, transfers to our retirement account, payments on any kinds of debt, like all of that happens automatically from this account. I also try to keep a little bit of a surplus in there, so in case I have a wild month, it'll be okay. I don't have to constantly be making sure I've got, I'm not going to go $20 over and end up overdrafting or something, because you don't want to pay those fees. But having a main kind of central hub where the most important stuff happens from. Then I have a second checking account that is the one we actually use for what I would call daily living. So if we want to go out and eat, if I'm going to buy groceries, gasoline, those kinds of things, you can probably budget about what you're expecting to spend a month on just like the day-to-day stuff. And I would say there's the automated stuff you don't want to think about at all. Most of the time, all you should have to think about on your finances is are we going to eat out tonight, and is it going to be Whataburger or is it going to be Nico's, right? I want to pay attention or think about how I'm going to use this from week to week. But I have the money going into the daily living checking automated, so I know exactly, I get paid twice a month. So twice a month, this amount of money is going to appear on this date and on this date, and so it kind of worked from that. So all the automated stuff, I worked very hard to get it in place, but then I don't think about it at all. And if I want to know how much money's left for this month to spend or for the next couple of weeks to spend, I've got this second checking account, and that's the one that I work out of. And if that one gets low, it means we stop spending money. And so that's valuable, because if you try to do all of that, like both your automated expenses and your daily living expenses out of just the same one, you're always having to pay attention to make sure you don't bite off too much with one of your, discretionary spending items that suddenly your important thing can't go through or you overdraft. So I think there's value in separating those. We also discovered that for our sanity, and I've talked about combining your finances, but it is the case, I think, for every married couple, there is some stuff that you just like to buy or spend money on that your spouse is just not that enthused about. So I know Kevin's listening in. I was joking with him the other day about things like book purchases. For guys like us, how many books are enough? More than I've got. Right? I've never been to a bookstore that I didn't find a bunch of stuff I wish I could come home with. Other people have that with fishing poles, or there's just all kinds of stuff you can really get into spending money on. And so I recommend part of your monthly budget is that each of you gets what I would call your fun money. And so what that means for us is we have an agreed upon amount that both of us get. And this is the one thing we do have as separate checking accounts, where each month each of us gets our little deposit of fun money. And at this point, we do the same thing for Joaquin, because we're always going to have to buy diapers and clothes or extra stuff for him as he's growing up. But the deal with the fun money is it is the money that we're allowed to spend, where the other person doesn't get to tell us how to spend it. So I'm kind of into buying records these days. I am sure I buy more sometimes than what Carolina would like. There's stuff that she would like to buy that I don't think she should spend so much money on. But as long as it's from the fun money, that's it's my decision, it's her decision, and we have an agreement not to be critical of how the other handles it, and that gives us a lot of sanity. It's nice to have something that you have autonomy over, because otherwise it's like, hey, we really needed like this new piece of furniture, or we really needed to replace this thing in the kitchen, and why can we not do that when you insisted that you needed 2 more books when you haven't read the last 50 that you're right? Like there's ways that can get tense really quick. So I think by having some discretionary spending, doesn't need to be a large amount, could be, but making it kind of fair, and making it where each of you has some autonomy. It's also a way we can do something nice for each other, where it's like, hey, we're kind of to the end of the paycheck, not a good time to eat out, and to say, well, I really feel like going out for a good meal, so I'll pay for this one on my fun money. Like it's a way you can also be nice to each other. So I hope my method here makes sense, but I've gotten to where I've started sharing this with young couples, because this has been really helpful for me in how we've managed things. So for what it's worth, that's something to consider. I know we're kind of out of time here. I was just kind of curious if you had any other general advice about what has helped you with greater peace for your finances. If you want to share anything else, I'm glad to hear from you. Okay, so back in the fall, we had this funny thing happen where, the elders, as part of my agreement when I came on staff here, is that I always have a week every year that's kind of a sabbatical, where I spend the whole week in prayer, contemplation. Toward the end of the week, I move toward like, what am I going to do from here? So the week after Easter, we've got a guy named Carson Reed who's coming in to speak. He's from Abilene Christian. He's going to do a great job. Fascinating guy, guru on church leadership. He's going to be really good to have around, but he'll be here the Sunday after Easter. But following Easter is going to be my sabbatical week. And so a week from today, there is not going to be class. I am going to take next week as a time to reflect. Back in the fall when I was supposed to do it, we had this weird COVID exposure potential on staff. And so it was kind of funny. The Sunday that I was supposed to be on sabbatical, every staff member except for me was potentially exposed to COVID. And so on the one Sunday I was supposed to be the one not doing anything, I was the only staff member who was present that Sunday. So that was kind of funny. But anyway, this is kind of my makeup for the fall. And so that will be next week. But I've been thinking through this. April the 21st, I'm going to start the new study. We got one lesson left in this financial series. What we're going to do starting April 21st, I've mentioned from time to time, I think some of you are aware, I've published 4 books. I wrote 4 different curriculum books, and I don't want to be self-aggrandizing, so I have not ever tried to, well, I will say I've taught the contents before, because a lot of times I would teach a class and what I taught became the basis of the book that I wrote. But I haven't published a book since I moved to King's Crossing. I was working on a doctoral degree and just didn't have the time to put into it, and life's been busy lately. But I thought it might be fun to kind of dig back out something that I have published before and work through it with you guys, because I do think it's good material. And so I've got a book that I wrote called The Story of God's People. I'm going to start this on April 21st. What I was trying to do when I wrote this book is that I feel like a lot of people have kind of done the super zoomed in version of Bible study, where you kind of look at all the nuts and bolts of like individual verses in a book, and you work through something like verse by verse. I think a lot of Christians really don't understand much about how all of Scripture fits together, and more of the bigger story that flows through it. And so I wrote this book as a 13 lesson, it's like a study for a quarter to help people understand how all that works. And so what I'm going to do, you can go directly to the 21st Century Christian website and order your own copy if you want to, but I think you would have to pay shipping. What I was going to suggest is that I'm just going to plan on making a larger purchase of these if you would like to buy one. And so I have made it where you can register online or even using our Church Center app if you would like to sign up to get one of these. And you can also pay online for the book that you're going to get. The cost on these, I think they're listed at $4.25 a piece. It's a small, flimsy 88-page book, so they're not expensive. But if you wanted to order one of these, if you got it yourself, I think they charge you $4.25, but I think you'd end up paying shipping on it. I'm going to charge $4.50 a piece to help cover the shipping costs, but I'm planning on buying however many we need. So if you'd like to sign up, I would encourage you to get the Church Center app from Planning Center, and then once you're logged into that, it's really easy. They make it easy to find our church and connect with our church. You can look. There's a little section called I think you can see my mouse there, but the section called Events. And when you go to Events, let me see. There's Church Center. So yeah. So like, I don't know if you're able to see this. So like there I am on the home page, and I can go to. I think events are loading. Yeah, there it is. So I can go here to the story of God's people. And from here, you can just go down. And what you'll want to do is just click register like you're going to be a participant. And as you register, I made book purchases and add-ons. So you could register and just purchase one book, or you could purchase multiple copies if you wanted. I'll say it is not necessary to buy the book in order to benefit from the classes. I think it would be beneficial though, because there will be like suggested readings. So I tried to select, I think I did, it was either 5 or 7 passages I suggest reading in preparation for each of the lessons. And then each lesson is kind of an explanation of, during this time in history, here's kind of what was going on. So I thought I would start with, I published this book in 2009. So at the time, I think I wrote it when I was 28. So it has been so long since I wrote it. I'm 40 now. So been quite a few years since I published it. It's going to be fun for me to dig back into this and say, I hope I still agree with myself on a lot of this stuff. But just the same, I thought it could be a fun study. I think there'll be some value in it, and would invite you to consider at least letting me know if you want me to get you a copy of the book. All right. As always, would encourage you to like and share our page. And you have any questions, thoughts, concerns, feel free to email me, mark@kingscrossingcoc.com. You can always sign up to get text notifications when class is going to go live at rmd.at/KC midweek. Always happy to have you sign up if you want to get those reminders. Been a great class. Appreciate everyone's input. And I'm just going to close this with a brief word of prayer. God, we thank you for all the ways you've been good to us, and we do ask that you continue to go with us and help us, and give us wisdom, give us peace, and thank you for the time we've had together tonight. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.